Welcome to the very best part of my broadcast week. This is going to be a different kind of takeout. We really haven't done this ever before. You know the show format, usually one, maybe two interview subjects and a conversation. This is going to be a little bit of that, but we're going to start with a piece of journalism I did in collaboration with our CBS investigative unit about something that's happening as a result of questions about the 2020 election. In the state of Georgia and elsewhere, but we focused on Georgia, there's a process by which citizens can challenge the voter registration status of other citizens. It is a complex and layered process, but it's going on. And these are, in some cases, not neighbors, but people of the same rough community, generally, checking each other out in terms of the legality or the propriety of their voter registration. We went to a place called DeKalb County, a suburb of Atlanta, to look at how this process is playing out. Enter this Kroger in suburban Atlanta, make a quick left, and you will find Master Barber James McWhorter holding court.
They giving it to him.
For 20 years, McWhorter used this barbershop as his mailing address. In October, the county sent him an unusual letter. His voter status was being challenged.
I had to put on my glasses just to make sure. It said what it was saying.
McWhorter was told to respond or risk the cancellation of your voter registration.
Why would someone challenge my right to vote?
The county was not challenging McWhorter's right to vote. A citizen of DeKalb County was. Her name, Gail Lee. She filed this document alleging McWhorter had improperly registered to vote using a commercial address. Lee went to McWhorter's barbershop and took pictures to prove the point.
Had you ever met Gail Lee? No, I didn't know Mrs. Lee from a can of paint.
I think God has been leading me in this.
Gail Lee is a retiree who lives with her husband. She invited us to the back porch of her suburban DeKalb County home. What is your feeling about who won the 2020 election?
I believe Donald Trump won the election.
Lee became convinced something was wrong with voting in Georgia. This, despite 3 recounts confirming Trump's loss. Lee started scrutinizing voter rolls.
They are bloated unnecessarily.
Lee and other citizen sleuths devote hours each week to inspecting county rolls, looking for signs of what they suspect is rampant fraud, such as names that appear more than once or data suggesting a registrant is deceased.
I am requesting that these challenges brought before you today be removed from the list of electors.
Each challenge requires a hearing to decide if the voter will be stricken from registration rolls. How many challenges have you filed?
I think it's only about 500.
She says only because some in her citizen network have challenged far more. We found more than 80,000 challenges have been filed against Georgia voters since 2021, when the Republican-led legislature changed the law, allowing one citizen to challenge an unlimited number of voters.
Well, welcome to our weekly voter rolls working group.
This is not just happening in Georgia. CBS News obtained video of conservative activists strategizing how best to deploy voter challenges across the country.
And I truly believe that there is fraud in the system, which is just it's not true.
DeKalb County Election Board Chair Carly Swift told us the challenges instead identify administrative errors and technical violations that shouldn't deprive citizens of their right to vote. Her staff has spent hundreds of hours dealing with voter challenges that she said so far tend to target the same demographic categories.
And it's young voters, it's people of color, and it's people that are unhoused.
It took a toll. And it still
In 1991, James McWhorter returned from combat duty in the Gulf and struggled with alcohol and homelessness. When he last registered to vote in 2008, he used the only address he had, the barbershop.
My friends, my family never knew I was displaced. They didn't know I was homeless. I would come back here after we would close, sleep here at the shop, get up an hour before we open.
10 days after McWhorter learned his voter registration had been challenged, he defended his right to vote before the election board.
I paid taxes here for 20 years, even though I was homeless.
And for the first time, faced Gail Lee.
For you to be able to challenge me, you have that right as a citizen of DeKalb County. But I served to give you that right.
And it was hurtful that she would do something like that.
Have you, in your mind, come up with an explanation of what the motive is?
to disenfranchise a certain demographic. You're trying to put your foot on someone else's neck.
I mean, all he had to do was call up the office and give him his address. It's not exactly a heavy foot.
After the hearing, McWhorter, who is no longer homeless, updated his address to bring it into technical compliance. Gail Lee said the system worked. Can you understand how people who are African American might feel this deeply, personally, in that your work feels threatening to them?
I would think they would want their vote protected too, because someone who doesn't belong on the rolls would take away their vote.
Make sure we have fair, honest elections.
Republican Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger oversees Georgia elections and voter rolls. Is that core assumption that the system is riddled with fraud valid?
No, we have objective voter rolls. They're clean, they're accurate.
Gail Lee told us she wants fairness, not partisan advantage. But Raffensperger said elections in Georgia have never been fairer.
It's never been easier to vote. We believe, the model for what election integrity, election accessibility should look like throughout the entire country.
Our investigation found that in Georgia, about 12,000 of these voter registration challenges have been upheld. That's about 15%. But election administration officials tell us that the vast majority of these cases are technical, administrative errors, and not evidence of systemic or widespread fraud. Even so, it raises a couple of questions. Do people know their voter registration status is being challenged? And what are the underlying motives of those who are challenging? Well, we put that question, that last one, to the person you heard from in that piece, Gail Lee. If you were to help me understand your motivation for doing this volunteer work, what is it?
I believe it's what God wants me to do. And I would love to see the voter rolls accurate, and everybody who is eligible and legally eligible to vote is registered on it, but that the people that are not legally eligible to vote are removed.
What is your feeling about who won the 2020 election?
I believe Donald Trump won the election.
Nationwide?
Nationwide. There's the machines. There was problems in Georgia with those. The voter rolls are a problem because they are bloated unnecessarily, which leads to possibilities for fraud. And if ours are bloated, they're probably bloated other places.
Mm-hmm. In other words, President Biden won the election from your vantage point because of fraud.
I think so.
And when someone like the Secretary of State says, well, Georgia looked at this and we counted the paper ballots, not once but twice, but 3 times, what does that mean to you? Does that persuade you at all that Georgia was okay?
There are other people that have studied this issue, and I'm not one of them. So I really couldn't answer.
Would you say you're certain that Donald Trump won the 2020 election, or you suspect he won the 2020 election?
I'd say I'm about 80%.
Do you think you could ever personally be persuaded that Joe Biden legitimately won that presidential election?
No.
No. And for those who might wonder if you have a particular political agenda, you would say?
No. We're neutral on that. It's just, we're looking, it's facts. It's simple data and facts. That's all we're looking for.
More of this special episode of The Takeout, a kind of deep dive into some of the intricacies of voting, voter registration, and voting status. Segment 2 of The Takeout coming your way.
If they don't belong in the rolls, we want them off. If they're dead, we want them off.
Welcome back to this special episode of The Takeout. Not a typical takeout, but a kind of deep dive into something that fascinates me. It's important for all of us heading to 2024. Voting, how we go about it, how do we verify it, how do we protect it? And part of that is registration status and the belief that some have after the 2020 election that there's all sorts of problems. One of them they think might be on the registration rolls, and they're digging into that to see how deep the problem is or if there is a real problem. Well, we explore that, and one of the things we found in Georgia is, in Georgia, citizens can challenge one another at an unlimited number of registration challenges. And that's where we pick up the conversation again with our challenger, Gail Lee. How many challenges have you filed? Do you have a sense of that?
I think it's only about 500.
500, okay.
Yeah.
Do you wish you could do more?
If we find them, yeah.
Is it your belief that if the voter rolls are, to use your word, cleaner, Republicans will win more often than Democrats?
Probably not in this county. It's a heavily Democrat county. But at least it'll be fairer.
Mm-hmm. Is that your ultimate aim? Fairer?
Fairer. I mean, the ultimate aim is to just have the people that are legally able to vote, vote, and to eliminate those that are not legally able to do it.
In what category would you place James McWhorter? As someone who was voting illegally and knowing he was voting illegally, or a technical violation that isn't necessarily fraudulent or bad?
Well, I'd say that was probably a technical violation for the circumstances that he had. The challenge process worked, however, because he came forward and changed his registration. And it turns out he was actually living in a different part of the county, which would be a different precinct than where he was voting. So and that's the good thing about the challenge, is because the people are given notice and they're told why it's being challenged. And so it gives them an opportunity to call and say, change my address. I didn't realize that I couldn't register with a post office box. We're not trying to get anybody put in jail.
Mm-hmm.
But if you register with a post office box or the commercial business like Mr. McWhorter was at, the potential is you could register someplace else with your residence address, and then you'd have 2 votes.
Would it surprise you to hear that James took it very personally?
No, I don't. I'm not surprised, but
That he felt, and these are his words, not mine, that someone's foot was on his neck?
well, I'm sorry you felt that way, but you know, he was, I mean, all he had to do was call up the office and give him his address. It's not exactly a heavy foot.
Can you understand how people who are African American might feel this deeply, personally, in that your work feels threatening to them in ways that they thought had been resolved before, as far as their access and their legitimacy to vote?
I would think they would want their vote protected too, because someone who doesn't belong on the rolls would take away their vote. I mean, I don't understand why they wouldn't want the voter rolls to be accurate. And I might add, when I'm looking at the voter rolls, I purposely hide the political leanings of the person that shows on the voter roll and their race, because that is one accusation. We're trying to pick out, you know, the Democrats or the people of color. That's not true.
You're not.
No. No.
You don't care one way or the other.
No. If they don't belong in the rolls, we want them off. If they're dead, we want them off. If they're double registered, they need to be off. At least one of the registered names needs to be off.
Is this your civic duty?
Yes.
Do you feel you're fulfilling it at a larger degree than you were when you weren't doing this work?
Yes.
Would you, if given the opportunity, want to say anything to James McWhorter?
Yeah, I would like to talk to him and tell him I'm sorry. He felt, threatened by it, but and
that you didn't. I gather you didn't mean it personally to him.
Heavens, no.
As you might expect, there's a process that goes on with each and every one of these voter registration challenges. Paperwork is filed, maybe evidence is presented, and then there's a public hearing. And that's exactly what we saw. A public hearing involving Gail Lee and one of the voters whose registration status she challenged. His name is James McWhorter. Had you ever met Gail Lee?
Never. No, I didn't know Mrs. Lee from a can of paint. And I actually thought, she started speaking, they asked her to sit down because they said, we're going to be here a while. She started going through all these voter registrations, legalities and illegalities and so forth. And that's when I started becoming angry with these things that she's stating. And obviously it was law. It had certain dash this, dash that, that, section this. So I said, she knows what she's talking about. Mm-hmm. But the reason behind it, even though it's legal to use a commercial address, why challenge that? What is your purpose? And come to find out, people that don't go, she requests them to be taken off the voter roll. It's beyond why a person want to do that. To take a person's, a right like that. But she has the right to challenge. Mm-hmm. That's her right. She can do that.
She is following the law.
She is following the law. I got to take my hat off to her, and I said to her, you enlightened me to a lot of things I did not know. With your 20 to 25 minutes of your script and your statements, if you fact check her, she's right. She has that right. You got to give it to her.
Did you interact with her very much?
No, but when I was speaking in front of the board, my conversation was totally towards her. I even, positioned myself so we can be eye to eye. And it was hurtful that she would do something like that.
What did you want her to hear?
My story, the reason why I did what I did. And you question that, the legitimacy of that. You question that. And I wanted her to know that I stood for something that allows you to have the right to do that. It comes down to an old movie I seen. Jeff Goldblum said, sometimes it's not if you could, if you should. I stood a post somewhere. I stood in the face of adversity with my life. I raised my right hand and said, I'll defend this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And my right was still taken from me. I don't think anyone that serves in any capacity should have that right taken from them, to give another person a right to question that. And that's what I wanted her to know.
James McWhorter's voter registration situation was unique. There is a backstory to it, and we're going to explain a little bit about what led to a kind of discrepancy that Gail Lee found and why it existed in the first place. That's in segment 3 of The Takeout in just 1 second.
I was taken aback. I really was. Why would someone challenge my right to vote?
Welcome back to this special episode of The Takeout, where we are really reaching in and sort of getting up to our elbows in voter registration status and how it's playing out in a place like Georgia. You've met James McWhorter. So he served in the Army, served in the first Gulf War, saw some things there that he now looks back on and says were traumatic. And because of that trauma, there were some alcohol issues. And that took him to a place where his voter registration status was taken away from him for a bit. We explore that here.
Looking back now, as I see it today, it took a toll. And it still weighs on me today. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. It still weighs on me, but I can't use that as an excuse. You know, life is still here to be lived. So let's try to take it with a grain of salt, make the best of it. Yes, sir.
And you coped with alcohol.
Yes, I did.
For a period of time.
Yes, I did. Heavily. I mean, that type of situation, your senses are heightened. So to speak, sleeping with one eye open. You know, every closed eye is not sleep. And it's hard to turn that off. You know, they teach you how to turn it on for your well-being. I never was taught how to turn it off. And to sleep, among other things, I would self-medicate with alcohol.
That helped you get to sleep.
Helped me get to sleep and stay to sleep. Because without it, silence is very loud. Silence is very loud. An acorn hitting the roof, you might as well just slam a car door next to me.
And then came some DUIs.
Yes, multiple misdemeanors, which transferred into a felony. 3 strikes and you're out.
What effect did the DUIs have on your voting status?
As a felon, you're not allowed to vote. At the time here in the state of Georgia, I lost that. You know, I can't fault anybody else. It was my doing. And I became accountable. And I did what I needed to do to regain that right, not a privilege. I did everything the courts asked me to do. And I regained my right to vote. And I was very proud of that.
So McWhorter regained his voter status in 2008, but he used as an address the barbershop because he was unhoused. And he didn't have a residence. Well, Gail Lee looked and saw that was a discrepancy. Well, the county sent James McWhorter a letter saying, you need to fix this. If there's a residential address, you need to clarify this discrepancy. Tell me about that letter that you got about your voting status and this whole thing that it's set in motion.
I was taken aback. I really was. Why would someone challenge my right to vote? So I looked at the letter and it said, you can bring representation. I said, I have to have legal representation for this? So I really didn't understand.
Did it at any point, James, feel personal to you?
It did. It did. That it's not just about me. It's about a whole bunch of other people who didn't have a chance to tell their story for the reason they did what they did to operate in society. You know, and I thank that individual for calling me an hour and a half after that meeting. I really do. Because it's not just about me. It's about a whole bunch of people.
There's a bigger effort.
Yes. It's an effort to give people voices when your voice is trying to be suppressed. I have to find a way to do more.
Something's been activated inside
Yes.
you.
Yes. Yes. If it's nothing more than being on my soapbox behind my chair, go vote. Say something. If it's nothing but being in this barbershop, I got to find a way.
As we showed you in segment 1, McWhorter went to the public hearing in late October, explained his situation, updated his registration address, and basically put to rest all questions about his eligibility and status as a registered voter. What's your takeaway from the entire experience?
Stay diligent in your efforts to be heard. You don't have to be loud, rambunctious, have a bullhorn to be heard. You can just take that little card, insert it into the machine, tap the screen. That speaks volumes.
So far, we've shown you and let you hear about the citizen versus citizen component of this registration challenge. Well, in between that is a county, lots of counties in Georgia, that try to figure all this out. And so we talked to Carly Swift. She is the chair of the DeKalb County Board of Registration and Elections. They're the ones who have to sort of look at the evidence presented and dig into the registration status of those voters who are challenged. It's a cumbersome process, and Carly Swift explains what that's been like.
I joined the Board of Elections not for some partisan reason. It was really because I wanted to make sure that that people could vote, that there was access, that we provided the citizens with notice. And over the past few years, the environment has changed. It is an environment that has become much more partisan.
In the state of Georgia, who is responsible for the voter rolls?
The Secretary of State's office is responsible for the voter rolls. That is something that I think a lot of members of the community do not always understand. They maintain the rolls and are responsible for them.
They think you do, though.
Some do. I mean, we do have the ability to remove people from the voter rolls as part of a process that's commonly referred to as like a voter challenge hearing, where a voter, the Board of Elections, can sustain a challenge, and then that individual voter would be removed.
Right, but absent that process, the maintenance is the responsibility of the Secretary of State's office.
Correct.
Talk to me about the number of challenges and how they have increased in this atmosphere you just referenced.
So prior to a Senate bill in Georgia passing, SB 202, challenges, individuals in the community could bring challenges, but they weren't able to bring what's now become known as mass challenges, where one person can challenge 5,000 voters at a time. The passage of that law changed that. And so we have voters that challenge 1,000 voters at one time. Since 2022, we've had over 1,700 voters challenged just in this county. And we expect there to be many more challenges in the next year leading up to the 2024 election. And that's 1,700 voters may not seem like a lot, but for a small elections office that is already understaffed, having to review, research, reach out to these voters, which there are requirements in the law about giving notice to voters. It's a significant burden on the office. And these challenges oftentimes don't even meet the standard of probable cause that's required to sustain a challenge.
From your perspective, is there a pattern, or has there been a pattern to these challenges?
Well, what we've seen is that the challenges, by and large, are coming from members of the right in our community. They seem to be challenging voters based on age. They've challenged voters based on residency, and often the impact of that is that the voters appear to be people of color. They appear to be people that are unhoused. They appear to be people that are in college. And so some can take from that is a challenge of a certain type of voter that would vote in a certain way. At the same time, I do believe that any citizen has the right to challenge voters. I just I have a problem, and I've said this on the record multiple times, that I have an issue with one single person having knowledge of 1,000 people. I don't know 1,000 people, so I don't know how you can challenge 1,000 voters and have knowledge of where they live or that they are ineligible to be on the roll.
Do you find their engagement helpful?
No. I think what SB 202 has done is created a group of amateur sleuths that have gone out and they are working together, maybe working through national networks to identify voters.
What do you think is behind this phenomenon?
You know, I think the easy answer there isn't an easy answer. I think that our environment, our election environment has changed since 2020. I think that unfortunately many members of our community have taken misinformation and disinformation to heart. And they truly believe that there is fraud in the system, which is just it's not true.
When we come back for segment 4 of the Takeout, more of our conversation with Carly Swift. She is the chair of the DeKalb County Board of Registration and Elections, and our conversation with Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger.
We have to have talks about security. We have to figure out how to protect our poll workers. We have to also allow for transparency. I actually think that it's okay that citizens can bring challenges, right? If you live at a house and you know specifically a person that has moved and they live in another district, and so that person should either be moved to a different district or you know that they moved to another state and they're voting in that state. To me, that's a different type of challenge. However, a challenge, this mass challenge of thousands of voters or hundreds of voters, it doesn't seem to me sincere, and I don't know, for me, that doesn't feel like my civic duty.
Welcome back to the Takeout. For all you Georgia election Swifties, that's a little joke there. That's Carly Swift. She is the chair of the DeKalb County Board of Registration and Elections. One of the things to think about when you consider voter registration rolls is they're not a kind of fixed inventory that you might see at a business, a tire store or something. The inventory is constantly changing. People die, people get married, people move into another county or to another state. All of it changes the inventory on a rather constant basis. We talked to her about that.
My experience is that systems like a voter registration system that is completely dynamic, it changes throughout the day, those systems are difficult to maintain, and they're maintained differently. And this idea that there would be no errors is just completely inaccurate.
The analogy I have is if you're a business person, you think of your inventory like,
right.
Let's say you run a grocery store and you know exactly how many cans of green beans you have. Well, that number is affected by how many you sell that day. But other than that variable, that data doesn't change.
Right.
That's not how a voter roll works.
It doesn't. I mean, there's so many variables that go into it. People's names change, people move, they move from one county to another county. Within a singular county, you can move within districts, which means that you then have a different type of ballot because you're voting in municipal elections for a different city council person.
And the timeliness of that data flow influences what appears and doesn't appear.
Absolutely. And again, the system can be cleaned up. There are processes that can be implemented that can make the whole process better. Right now, in Georgia, we're moving to a new system that a lot of elections officials, our office sent a letter that said, hey, we need to ensure that this system is going to be operable in time for the 2024 election cycle. So there's a lot that can be done, but this idea that you just have this fixed static system that's going to be perfect is not reality.
How does all this make you feel as you anticipate 2024?
Well, 2024 is going to be interesting. I think that we are seeing we're seeing the beginning of
it's going to be more than interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot. 2024 is going to be a lot. You obviously know what's happening in Georgia. We have a former president that's on trial. DeKalb County is next to Fulton County, which had significant issues and challenges. We are just preparing for what we expect to see. We have to have talks about security. We have to figure out how to protect our poll workers. We have to also allow for transparency. And we expect to receive many more challenges over the next year.
From your vantage point, would it be better if the unlimited was taken out of the law? Meaning,
100%. I think that we would all, I don't have an issue with an individual challenging a voter. It
based on knowledge or experience directly.
Right. Or, I mean, if you could only bring challenges that you have knowledge of, you're not going to bring 10,000 challenges or 1,000 challenges. I think making it unlimited, making anyone being able to allowing anyone to be able to bring it creates what we're seeing.
An incentive structure.
It is, you are incentivized to challenge voters.
One of the things you learn when you dig deeply into issues relating to voting, voter status, registration, all these things is jurisdictional lines. So the counties have their jurisdictional lines and issues, but in Georgia, the state, and the Secretary of State specifically, is in charge of voter rolls. So we talked to the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, who says Georgia's rolls are clean, update, accurate, solid. Let's listen.
We had an honest and fair election in 18, 20, and 2022. And we're going to have honest and fair election in 2024. It's going to be accessible, it's going to be secure, fair, and honest and accurate. And that's what we're working with the counties on every day.
Why does Georgia have mass citizen challenges for registration?
Well, that was an element that was actually put into place with SB 202, the Election Integrity Act of 2021. And I actually spoke about that several times, is that there is a proper place to, voters should be able to challenge registrations, because the voter rolls end up over a period of time. Sometimes there's some challenges. What about this? Did the counties miss something? So there is that aspect, but I think it needs to be done responsibly. And that's currently being litigated, so I'll probably just leave that, there.
The word suppression does get thrown around voting, sometimes recklessly. Is there anything about mass challenges that is, in its very nature, of its origin, suppressive?
No, I don't believe so. No, because I think that people, haven't voted for a while, or they're in transition. That's just, people that are where they are. I don't think that has anything to do with, what their national origin or any other demographic, basis that would be. And I think what we're seeing right now, if you look at, the whole spectrum of voters we have in Georgia, all demographic groups are, turning out to vote in relatively about the same percentages.
Some of the citizen activists we've talked to say they are motivated by just a general belief that the system is fraudulent and that they're trying to police things as a citizen. They think they're carrying out some kind of extra citizenship duty. They're following the law. I'm not suggesting for a second that they're not following the law. But is that core assumption that the system is riddled with fraud valid?
No. We have very clean voter rolls. We have 17 days early voting. And we now have photo ID for any form of voting in Georgia. We think that has really helped, really expand the security and people's confidence in the absentee ballot process. So if you want to vote absentee in Georgia, that requires driver's license or 6 or 7 other forms of identification. So we have voter ID for absentee voting. The same ID that we use for in-person voting is now used for absentee voting. It doesn't matter if you vote early or election day. So we're treating every voter the same. But that has really, I believe, added an element of security, but also elevated people's confidence. I understand that we live in a polarized time. I said that back in January 2020, before we had that race. And people just have to understand, someone's going to win, someone's going to lose.
Do you think that in that atmosphere, this citizen vigilance, this citizen detective work creates new openings to challenge elections? That people say, I was challenging this and those rolls aren't good and I filed all these things and they weren't adjudicated properly. That's another reason to doubt the results of elections. Do you have any anxiety about that?
Well, I think one of the outcomes of the challenge is if you're not successful in it, you feel like you were right, and all of a sudden you go away and you're not any happier than you would have been. I think you have to understand, and that's what people need to come to grips, is what happened in 2020. And until people face the brutal truth, then how are you going to move from good to great?
And until you accept that brutal truth, you're going to spin and spin and spin.
Right. And look for excuses. Well, you need to look for solutions.
Thanks for listening to this special episode of The Takeout. Voter registration, citizen challenges, microcosm of our country, the state of Georgia. Hope you've enjoyed it. We'll see you next week.